Hello everybody and welcome to another Media Studies lesson. If you're joining us at this point, I highly recommend you go back and watch all of the videos up in sequence. They build on each other in terms of content, plus you get some of the systems and the way we work here. I'm going to deliver this basically like it's a lesson in a classroom. So what you're going to need if you're a student is a mini whiteboard and whiteboard pen, and then an exercise book or some way of making notes, some lined paper, something like that. This is our introduction to the media topic, so we're covering all of the kind of background stuff that you might need to know. If you're a teacher watching this, you can download and purchase these lessons to deliver yourselves in your classroom. There's a link in the description to my TES Shop. If you're a student, again, hope you enjoy what you're getting here. Please feel free to leave a comment. Keep them nice, keep them clean. Let's have a nice, respectful environment here. And do subscribe as well and add a little like. It does help the channel. It helps other people find this content. I'm not doing this for any kind of monetary gain. This is just to help people and help mainly my students. So without further ado, what I would normally do in a lesson here is as students are coming in, this would be on the screen and they all know that this is a low stakes quiz. Hopefully you know the answers. It's not the end of the world if you don't at this stage, but you're going to write these down on your mini whiteboards. This will be done in silence while I'm taking a register. So you normally have 2 or 3 minutes now to get this done. If you need to at any point, please do pause the video just to give yourself enough time to get these tasks done. If you've been following these lessons from the beginning, then you should be able to answer these relatively quickly and relatively easily. Okay, question 1. Define the 3 formats of media. Before we actually get into this, you may think you've seen these questions before. This is the first run of lessons in this scheme, if you like. So we haven't covered a lot of content yet. So you are going to get kind of repeated questions. As we develop and go through more and more content, these questions will become more varied. Okay, define the 3 formats. You'll see that formats is in red because I color code my topics. This is the introduction to the media, that's red. And as you can see, future topics are going to be different colors. The 3 formats of media are print, broadcast, OS&P, which stands for online, social, and participatory. Media language is all about how the media communicates meaning. Representations, the way people, places, and events are presented or portrayed in the media. Audiences is all about the people that consume the media and the potential effect the media has on them. And then industries is the people and companies that create and distribute the media. Our lesson title today is Historical Contexts Generations. But before you write this down, what I would like you to do is turn to a brand new clean page in your book, even if you have space left from a previous lesson. And I would like you to turn that page landscape. So today we're going to be working on one page in our book's landscape. You do need to be able to get the title in the top corner and put today's date as it keeps everything organized and neat. You don't need to write down the lesson objective. That's a waste of time. You can see it on the screen, but you do need to be aware of what we're doing today. So today we need to be able to explain the differences between beliefs, morals, and values of different generations. Without covering old ground too much, recently we've been exploring context. That means the surrounding factors that might impact the media product or the audience who are consuming that product. So we need to know a little bit about what was going on at a certain time, what people thought, what they believed. And so far, we've explored colonialism, war and post-wartime Britain, feminism, the civil rights movement, and LGBTQ+ issues. Today, we're going to be focusing on social attitudes at certain times in the past. So we're back to historical contexts, but also this is where historical and social contexts intersect or cross over. What did the adults value in the 60s? What did the youth believe in the 80s? What happened when the youth grew up and became adults? What media did they have access to whilst growing up? What did the media promote in the 90s? So again, please bear in mind that this is not a fully detailed investigation into all of this. This is a brief summary. This is an overview. This is just enough to give you the foundations you need to think about this in media studies. So my students like to write down definitions as they appear on the screen before we get into it. So rather than fight that, I always say, write this in the back of your books in your terminology lists. Now, you might want to pause the video here to do that. This should only take you 30, 40 seconds to just get this as a definition down. So the term generation is used to think about the audience as a collective rather than as individuals. It's quite loose as many people bridge the gap and could be considered part of several generations. My cousin, for example, was born in 1980, so he's in the final like age considered to be part of Gen X, but also it could be considered that he's part of Gen Y. So it's not a strict, you are part of this group when you were born at this time. It's more of a general way of thinking about the periods in history and what people were going through. It's loosely based on birth years, but more importantly, it's about the events that shaped that generation, the things going on in the world around that time of their birth and as they grew up. For us, we need to consider the types of media they would have had access to. By the end of this lesson, you're going to have something like this in your books, and that's why I needed you to have it landscape. This gives a nice summary of different generations and what was going on for them at the time, but we're going to take it one generation at a time. So, we don't need to go too far back in history for this, because the media, as we understand it today, has only really existed for about 100 years or so. If we go back roughly that far, we get to what was known as the silent generation, sometimes known as the greatest generation. So you can see here that they were born between 1928 and 1945, which means now they are well into their 80s and 90s. In the UK, there were roughly around 8 to 9 million people born into that generation. Now, the really important thing to understand is the media they grew up with. From an early age, they had newspapers and radio, and that was pretty much it. Cinema became a key experience when they were teenagers, but even that was still quite new at the time. There was no television for most of their childhood, no internet, definitely no smartphones, nothing like that. So their experience of the media was very limited compared to what we have today. Because of that, and because of the time period they lived through, this generation is often associated with quite traditional values. Things like conformity, a strong work ethic, and a focus on stability and responsibility. A lot of that comes from the fact that they either lived through or were directly affected by some major global events. For example, the Great Depression would have impacted their early lives. They would have been very young at the time, and it would have been more about their parents going through that, but it would have affected them. Then you've got World War I and World War II, which is a huge shaping event for this generation. After that, the period of post-war reconstruction, where there was a real focus on rebuilding society and creating stable lives for families. So when we think about this generation, we need to link those experiences, the limited media and those major events, to the kinds of values and attitudes they developed. You may have noticed here that in the top right-hand corner, it's changed from an I do, which is the teacher providing the information and modeling tasks, to we do. We do's are quite difficult if you're just watching this as a video because you're the only one there. But in my classroom, what we would be doing now is a small turn and talk. And what I would want you to do is discuss with your partner what do you think the 3 biggest hitting facts are about the silent generation, and then decide what they are and write them on your mini whiteboard. If you had to summarize what we said in just 3 bullet points, what were the 3 big things that you took away from that? So what media did they have access to? What values and ideologies they had? Were there any specific shaping events that you can remember that you went, oh, that was probably a big deal for them? If you need to, pause the video here for 45 seconds and try and bullet point 3 things that you think that's my takeaway points. Again, some of you need a little bit more scaffolding, a little bit more help, so here is some information for you. What I would do now is I would take feedback from my students, and between us, we would decide which are the 3 kind of biggest hitting points to make a note of. Well, now it's over to you. In your books, you need to create a timeline that looks like this. It doesn't need to be fancy. Try and use a ruler, keep it nice and neat rather than scrappy lines. But we're going to start with one little box for the silent generation. The 3 bullet points I've picked here are newspapers and radio from an early age, conformity, traditional values and a strong work ethic, and World War II and post-war reconstruction. They're the big things that probably affected that generation. If you had something different, that's fine. What you should do now is pause the video here for about 2 minutes to put that specific box in. Now, the rest of the lesson is pretty much just going to follow that kind of system. We're going to explore a generation, come up with a few bullet points of what we think the most big hitting pieces of information were, and then add them to our timeline. The next generation after the silent generation are the baby boomers. So you can see here that they were born between 1946 and 1964. They're now roughly in their 60s and late 70s. In the UK, this is a much larger generation, around 13 to 14 million people. So that already tells us something important. This is a generation that grew up during a period of population growth. That's why they're called the baby boomers. In terms of media, things start to change quite a lot here. They still would have had radio from an early age, just like the previous generation. But now we start to see television becoming a really important part of everyday life. For many of them, TV becomes central during their childhood and teenage years. You also get things like vinyl records becoming popular. So music becomes something people can own and experience at home and choose. So compared to the silent generation, they have more access to the media and more variety as well. In terms of values, this generation is often seen as being a bit more individualistic. They're associated with social change and challenging some of the more traditional ideas from the previous generation. So things like the civil rights movement, anti-war protest, feminism all become really important during this time. You also get the rise of pop culture, especially music, which plays a big role in shaping identity. Again, on your mini whiteboard now, what are the three biggest hitting facts that we just talked about? So now it's up to you to add that to your timeline. Again, I've got a few points here. Radio from early life, TV coming in, more individualistic attitudes, but involvement in social change. Things like civil rights, feminism. The next generation after the boomers is Gen X. They were born between 1965 and 1980, which means they're now roughly in their mid-40s up to around 60. In the UK, there's around 11 to 12 million people in this group. Now again, the media begins to develop quite a lot here. TV is now completely normal in the home. So this is a generation that grows up with it as a standard part of everyday life. You also start to see things like early video games, video home system, which was old cassette tape, something we had before DVDs, and home media becoming more popular. For the first time, audiences are not just consuming media, they're starting to interact with it a bit more as well. In terms of values, this generation is often described as being more independent, sometimes a bit skeptical of authority, like they're afraid of authority, don't believe or trust the governments. They're less likely to just accept things as they are. They're more likely to question things. There's also more of a focus on things like work-life balance and financial stability. In terms of shaping events, you've got economic uncertainty, rising unemployment, and things like Thatcher-era policies in the UK. In a future lesson, we're going to look at politics, so that'll help with this. You also see the continued growth of consumer culture, where buying products and brands becomes really important to your identity. So overall, this generation is where the media becomes more embedded into everyday life. Okay, mini whiteboard time. What do you think were the biggest hitting points from that? And now onto your timeline. You don't have to copy mine. You might have your own thoughts. And again, I encourage you to go and research this around a little bit more on your own. This is just an overview of these generations. Next, we have Generation Y. So you'll notice now that the generations are kind of given letters. The first one we just explored previously was Generation X. The X actually stood for like wrong or no, or people believed they had no morals. And then Y was just after X. So the letter system just started there. Often Generation Y are also known as millennials because they had their kind of formative years, the years where they really found themselves around the millennium, around the end of the 90s, starts of the noughties. They weren't born then, but they had their teenage years around them. And that's quite an important difference. So they were born between 1981 and 1996. Now they're roughly in their late 20s to mid 40s. In the UK, there's around 13 million people, again, in this generation. Now, this is where things really start to shift in terms of media. This generation grows up with video games and computers. And then during their teenage years, the internet becomes a central part of their lives. So unlike previous generations, they're not just consuming the media, they're starting to create it and to share it. In terms of values, this generation is often seen as more socially aware. There's a strong focus on things like equality and diversity and global issues. A lot of this is influenced by the fact that they're connected to people and ideas from all over the world through the internet. In terms of shaping events, you've got things like 9/11, the 2008 financial crisis, and the rapid rise of the internet and mobile technology. So this generation is where the media becomes interactive, global, and much more personal. I think you know what we're going to do here. On your mini whiteboard, biggest hitting points. And now again, adding something to your timeline. So after that, we have Generation Z or Gen Z, often known as digital natives. So they were born between 97 and 2012. So they're currently in their early teens up to their mid to late 20s. I imagine many of you watching this will fit into that generation. I suppose it does, relate to how long this video stays on YouTube for. In the UK, there are around 12 million people in this group, slightly smaller than previous generations. Now, this generation has grown up with the media everywhere. From a very young age, they had access to the internet, smartphones, and social media. So for them, there isn't really a clear line between online and offline life. It's all just part of your normal experience. In terms of values, this generation is often described as being more diverse, more globally aware. They tend to place a strong focus on identity and representation and social issues. A lot of that is shaped by what they see and experience through social media. In terms of shaping events, you've got the world after the financial crisis, the rise of social media, the dominance of smartphones. So this is a generation where the media is constant, immediate, and heavily linked to identity. They also had their formative years around COVID, and that's going to have made an impact as well. On your mini whiteboards, 3 bullet points, biggest hitting facts. And again, onto your timelines, what can we add to those? Now we're into Generation Alpha. So these are people born from around 2013 onwards, so they're currently still children. In the UK, this generation is estimated to be around 9 to 11 million in total at the time, maybe even by the time we kind of finish this generation. So again, it's a reduction in birth rates. It's a smaller generation. Now, this generation is growing up in a world where the media is fully integrated into everyday life from the very beginning. They have access to tablets, smartphones, and on-demand content from a very young age. Things like streaming, YouTube, and apps, they're completely normal. They're also growing up at a time where things like AI and immersive technology are starting to develop. So in terms of values, it's still a little early to fully define them, but they're likely to be shaped by a highly connected world, focus on technology, but also diversity and global awareness. In terms of shaping events, well, one of the biggest is COVID-19 pandemic. This would have affected them in their early childhood. Alongside that, you have the rapid development of digital technology and AI. So this generation is where the media is not something separate. It's just part of everyday life from the start. Again, on your mini whiteboards, what do you want to bullet point from the information we just covered? And finally, adding to your timeline. Compared to previous lessons, this one will have been a bit quicker, but hopefully you will have paused at the right time and given yourself enough time to develop your timelines. Now, everything in this lesson has been whistle stop. That means really brief, really quick. It's just an overview. It's, like I say, just enough to tackle media studies as a subject. I highly encourage you to read around that. For those of you watching this who'd be my students, you know this, and if you're a teacher watching this, then home learning here is key. Going and doing some research projects on those generations and how the media might have affected them. Now, some of you may disagree with my interpretations of these generations, and that's fine too. That means you're listening, it means you're paying attention, it means you're doing your own research. This is not by any means literally exactly how things were, but this is enough for us to be able to talk about it and discuss the changes in the historical context and the social values that have affected audiences over time. My parents' generation is different to me. Your generation, if you're watching this as a younger person, is different to mine as well. And we have to explore and explain and understand why that was. Everything we've done up to this lesson has helped with that. And this may have put some of that into just a different lens or a different perspective. Hopefully at this point you could answer these questions. What is a generation? Why might different generations have different values and ideologies or beliefs? Believe it or not, in my lesson, this would have been one of the longest lessons I've delivered because I would have had a lot of time paused for students to add and discuss and develop their work. In fact, we rarely actually get through this in 1 hour session. The discussion and the adding to the timeline can actually take a bit longer. But if for any reason you have got through that quickly and you want to extend and expand this, then here is a question for you to start discussing. The media simply reflects society back at itself. It doesn't influence it. To what extent do you agree? With all of these to what extent do you agree questions, you should be arguing both sides. You should be saying, I agree to a part extent, a limited amount, or even to a large extent is fine. But you're never fully agreeing or fully disagreeing. You're trying to argue both sides. Even if you take a side, how might someone else interpret it? This can be done as a speech. This could be written in your books as an essay. This could be done as a series of flashcards or a presentation. It's really up to you how you tackle these questions. Thank you for your time. Thank you for watching this. If you've made it to the end, well done. Don't forget to like and subscribe. It helps other people find it. Put something in the comments as well. Even if you disagree with the content in the lesson, keep it nice, keep it kind, keep it constructive. And again, if you're a teacher and you would like this lesson PowerPoint to deliver, even if you then go and adapt it, that's fine. These are available on my TES Shop, link in the description. Thanks for your time, and I'll catch you at the next one.